You are now part of a social experiment.
See now where my limit is. Only got no.
Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us today on the journey towards self-mastery. Our next guest was a member of Freedom House, the first paramedic team in the world. Freedom House was based in Pittsburgh and was ahead of its time. It was the first to start administering medicine and healthcare outside of the hospital setting. Our guest was the first person to ever intubate a patient outside of the hospital and has assisted in helping develop the books and training that would be provided for paramedics for decades to come. He retired as an assistant director of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Emergency Medical Services, where he organized the city's first diversity recruitment paramedic program. He also trained and mentored the first Black Chief Paramedic in Pittsburgh history, Amera Gilchrist. He now aims to spread the legacy of Freedom House all over the world. Let's welcome today Mr. John Moon to the program. John, it is an honor having you on the program, man. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, and thanks very much for having me. It's an honor.
Yes, sir. The pleasure is mine. Do you prefer John or Mr. Moon?
John is great, yes. Yes,
sir. I got to clear that up. Man, I'm so excited to just have you here, man, because what happened was I was listening to NPR, like this was months and months ago, and they did like a short little segment on Freedom House. And I'm like, maybe NPR, they don't have their facts together. Like, what are they talking about? Like, the first paramedic team was Black. Like, this would be in textbooks. We would know all of this. Like, why, so I had to do my own research and I found out it was true. And I'm like, wow, like, this is crazy. And then I saw interviews of you and, I saw the book American Sirens. I'm like, wow, I gotta get John here, man. Like, this is fascinating because you're talking about a whole field that people just, first off, expect that. I've spoken to people and they're like, wait, paramedics hasn't been around for like centuries? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you would never imagine that it's such a new profession. And then also you would never imagine that this thing was, head fronted by black men. Like, so definitely an honor, man. It's like talking to a superhero right now. Yeah, man. So I know people might not be kind of familiar with Freedom House. I didn't know of it myself months ago, until now. So would you mind sharing just how Freedom House got started, what it was, the purpose of it, and how it became the world's first paramedic team?
Well, that's a very interesting point because I'll have to take you back in time, which was before paramedics, before 911, in a underserved, neglected neighborhood called the Hill District of Pittsburgh. It was a predominantly Black neighborhood. During that time in the 60s, I would say racism was at an all-time high. African Americans were last on the totem pole as far as jobs and job training and things like that. And it wasn't necessarily in Pittsburgh, it was actually across the country. So the federal government decided to do something or try to impact that. So they start funneling dollars into various neighborhoods that were impacted by racism and neglect and underserved communities to try and offset that. In doing that, the respective communities were required to kind of create different formats for job training and employment opportunities, voter registration, educational situations for the individuals that hadn't got their high school diploma and things like that. So you had one community center, perhaps in the city of Pittsburgh, that undertook that. And the community center itself was called Freedom House. And in Freedom House itself, it was actually a building in the community where people could go to register to vote. They could go there to sign up for job training programs or look for employment. Believe it or not, there was even a mini food bank inside this structure to provide food to these individuals that were underserved and things like that. So as a part of that, there was a gentleman who was in charge of a foundation that gave money to Freedom House. And his name was Phil Hallen. And he came up with the idea that if this community could deliver food and things to the residents of the Hill District, why can't they deliver medical care? Because the community itself had to rely on the police to get you back and forth to the, not even back and forth, but to take you to the emergency room. So you're looking at a community that had a very adversarial relationship with the police. So, and I'm not just trying to disparage law enforcement in any way, shape, or form, but picture you calling a 7-digit number. There was no 911 in the 60s, and they would send a police wagon with 99% of the chance it was white officers on there. They would come to your residence if they decided to show up, or when they decided to show up, or if they decided to take you, because they had very minimal medical training. So you really never knew what you were going to get. So if you can imagine 2 police officers putting you in the back of a paddy wagon on a canvas cot, and both officers getting up front and driving you to the emergency room. And you would lay back there until they got there. And if your heart stopped beating en route, or you stopped breathing en route, or any type of medical problem that can occur nowadays occurred in the back of that wagon, and there was no one back there to help you. No one. So as a result of that, people unfortunately were dying needlessly as a result of lack of medical care. So Phil Hallen, who's a great friend of mine, he's 93 years old, and we're still in contact today. He came up with this idea of this organization can drop off food. Why can't they deliver medical care? Because you had residents that couldn't make it to doctor's appointments if there were invalids and things like that. So they couldn't get a cab to come to that neighborhood. No other outside ambulance or something would come there. So you were really trapped in captivity in a particular community. So Phil came up with the idea that if we could get medical care to these people, then that would change the trajectory of what was happening. So they said, okay, well, that's a great idea, but we don't know how to do this. So Phil, he's the visionary. He says, well, let's check with the local hospital, which was Presbyterian Hospital at that time. And the hospital administrator put him in touch with a gentleman by the name of Peter Saffer. He was the head of the Department of Critical Care Medicine and Anesthesiology Department. And for years, it was his goal, his vision, his dream to teach the world that it's not how fast you got the person to the emergency room, but what was being done for them before they got there. But no one would believe him. So up comes this organization with this idea, and they were put in contact with Peter Saffer, and he saw it as a golden opportunity to get his vision out into the world, out into the country. And he had to prove that you could take lay people with no medical training and teach them how to save someone's life. So Freedom House, with a number of meetings, talked to him and said, this is what we want to do for our community. He says, great. And they said, we have one requirement. Every person that you train has to be Black. And he said, okay. So they take 25 Black men. And this was probably the most unusual group that you would ever think of. We were labeled as the least likely to succeed, hardcore unemployables, society's throwaways, people that wouldn't amount to nothing by society's standards. So Dr. Saffer takes these people and put them into a training program and trained them to the most sophisticated way that had ever been done. Not to provide care in the hospital, but to provide it outside of the hospital, at the person's home or on the street or in their job, wherever they would find them. So he trained them how to do CPR, how to look at a heart monitor and interpret what they call an EKG strip, how to transmit that back to the hospital, how to treat a patient that was critically injured in an automobile accident, how to assist a person that had trouble breathing, or a drug overdose or a shooting, anything that could happen to a person outside of the hospital, they were trained to do. There was classes in the emergency room and the intensive care units, the operating room, obstetrics, in delivering babies, even the morgue, anatomy and physiology. We also spent time in labs practicing on dogs that had to be kept quiet because you're taking an animal. And so all of this training we had to go through in order to take that concept away from the hospital, away from the intensive care unit, away from the operating room, away from the emergency rooms, and take it out into the street for the public. And it had never been done before.
Man, that is so powerful. And just for some context, I know people probably don't understand what the state was at that time in regards to nationwide, but they say you had a higher chance, especially in Pittsburgh, of surviving, a gunshot wound in Vietnam than surviving a car accident or a gunshot wound, in Pittsburgh. So it's like, this is like, life-changing for the world because this is unheard of,
And you're absolutely correct. And it's not only in Pittsburgh, it's for every city across this country, because in Pittsburgh, this was the only thing that was prospering at that particular time. Other cities were, training individuals in a variety of different things, but Freedom House merged with the local hospital. And this was what was born out of a vision of two people, Dr. Peter Saffer and Phil Howland, to bring this to fruition.
Yeah, that is so powerful, man.
So every day I'm going hard. I'm talking business, bank accounts, and credit cards. And somehow we defeat the odds and making sure that no one starves illegal